I don't know the answer.
Well, what were those death threats about? Why were they so
You
concerned?
uppity women
Ah,
coming out here and messing up our work when we are taking care of children.
ah,
And you just get out of our business, or we will see that you can't do that anymore.
ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it was real.
Oh, yes.
They had more to say than that. But
Right, right. Were they on your phone?
yes, they were on my telephone at night.
Right.
And I had 2 children under 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
And my husband had just gotten out of the Army, and we were doing this, and having a big time doing it, and thinking we were doing the right thing and good things. As it turned out, we were.
Yes. Right.
And Gene and I were coming home from a dinner thing at one time, my husband and I. And we were riding in a car together with Art Yerge and his wife. And Art was the brand new juvenile court judge. And he asked me, he said, now stop the car. And we stopped the car up by Lake Ivanhoe. I have to ask you this. He says, before I was sworn in, I went in and was shown my desk. And under the blotter on my desk, there is this blueprint for a building, and I don't know what it is. Now, will you please tell me? It was the new parental home.
Really?
Well, yes. And we talked a long time. My husband got very tired of waiting in the car. But yeah, I remember that well. And he did come in as juvenile court judge, and they started a whole new process for delinquent children and dependent children and education for them. Well, out of that later grew a committee on education of the league. And again, Sarah Howden, my mother was very much a part of that. I remember Sarah saying, you can tell by walking into a classroom whether learning is taking place. And she divided our committee into lots of people and assigned us by age of children and location of the community and dates and times of day that we were to go and visit classrooms in Orange County and then report, which we did. And by golly, she was right. You could tell by walking in the back of the classroom and sitting there a little while whether learning was taking place. Some children were hungry. If you went in on Monday morning, lots of children were hungry. Some children by the end of the day were falling asleep at their desks. Mm-hmm. Some teachers were doing what they should be doing, and some were not. I mean, there was just so much to see. Now, again, this was in the early 60s in Orlando. Mm-hmm. And but I remember Sarah chastising our committee. You know, you can't be tired. You can't be dressed wrong. You can't go at the wrong time. You can't say the wrong thing. You mustn't go up to the front of the class and all the things we had to do right. Mm-hmm. But that was a great committee. And that was another committee of the league. That's how the league worked back then. Committees on the different things that we were interested in.
Right. The units, you say there were maybe a dozen units?
That was my understanding at the time.
At the time. And there were maybe 8 to 15 or 20? You said there were 15 or 20 people at the most in each unit?
Yes, that's right.
That sounds like a lot of people. Do you know how many people were in the league in the
No, I don't
50s
know.
And 60s?
You could probably look it up somewhere, but right. I don't know.
Yeah.
And 20 people, 15 people didn't come to every unit meeting.
Right.
8 or 10 did. Yeah.
Okay. And the units would be brainstorming about what issues were important?
You can, that's very nicely said. You can imagine the units were talking about whatever is happening now and mm-hmm. what we think about it. Right. Yes. Yes. But also the director, the chair of the unit, had been briefed by the board of directors of the league as to what the possible topics were and what we should lean toward and gather information about so that the whole league could develop projects.
Okay.
The projects grew out of the units, but yes, when we went to the unit, somebody was sitting there with where do you start today?
Okay. But then there were also committee meetings that were on specific subjects.
Not really, not
Okay.
that I recall. The no, the units
Oh, excuse me.
later, Mary, later. Thank you. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I felt like the units, by the time I started going to units, also was a place where information that a small committee had gleaned about those topics
Right.
that the league had decided, then it went back to the unit and was presented
yes.
to the people and to the members, who then could vote from an educated point of view whether we should take action on this in this particular area.
That's absolutely true, but the unit was not the whole league. And
Oh yeah, I know that.
From the unit, you couldn't go, for instance, and make a statement to the county commission.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You had to work within the framework of the league's position. But yes, you'd have a committee of the unit, all kinds of things. Go out and do the work and come back and put it together, but you still had to be sure that it was within the aegis of
I
the
just
league.
always felt that the units allowed the members to ask those kind of detailed questions. Well, what do you mean by delinquent? And what's the difference between delinquent and
Right.
dependent, as opposed to just kind of taking, hearing a speaker about it or whatever,
Well,
which is what we're doing, what we're having to do today.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The units were wonderful because it was hands-on all the
Right.
time,
Yes, from the
and you got up from there ready to go do something, which you can from a speaker, but it's not the same. I miss the units, and it may be that we're just too large now, and the territory is too large, and the subject matter is too large. But you're right. The 4 or 5 people from the unit could do a lot of things that we don't seem to generate. I wanted to talk about another aspect of the same thing. And in the whole world today, the changes in technology with iPhones and Twitters and Facebook and communication systems have changed our world. When we were talking about the 50s in the units, we had telephones, barely had television, but that was it. And the league members communicated through the units. So we don't have that now, but we do have the speakers, and we have all these technology systems. We're as a world, or as a community, and certainly as a league, we're going to have to get hold of a way to use all of that better than we're doing.
How did the what you learned in the league support your development of the 4C?
Whoa. In every way. And first, with the matter of Robert's rules and organization of bylaws and a community, and also employee-employer relationships. And I knew how to handle government regulations and government publications and find out who wrote them and who had the authority. There was a time, I'd been at 4C a long time, and I was in the habit of reading the Federal Register every week, all of it. And I read the state laws that were passed. Didn't read all of everything, but I knew what was going on. But one of the things I read in the Federal Register was an approval, or or a directive that managers of Head Start programs should reserve in their budget a certain portion of the money that was paid to employees and use it or declare it to draw down the match from the federal government for the next month. And I thought, that's illegal. And I certainly was not going to do it with child care money. We were getting a lot of federal money. But there was a man down in St. Petersburg who had down there the same job that I had in Central Florida, who was doing it big time, and he reserved money from the paychecks of his employees and called it a contribution from their employees. They knew it was not a secret. It was a percentage of their income all the time as a contribution to the program to draw down the next federal money. And I never told anybody until right now, but eventually the feds found out what he was doing and he went to jail. Now, the only reason we weren't doing it is because I read about it in the Federal Register. It's important, and I learned that at the league. You've got to know the rules. Find out who's in charge and what the rules are, and abide by them. So yeah, I was at 4C at the time with the whole integration, racist segregation was a big deal. And that was the time when the civil rights offices were set up, and anybody that had a job, my job was worth $10,000 a year, but anybody that had a job could be charged for, holding their face wrong. And a person in my office charged me at the civil rights office saying that the secretary for a man in my employ was earning more than she was, and she was my secretary. And I said, that's not true. And she said, well, he told me. And then she told the civil rights office, and I said, go look at the books, which they did, and he's not earning more than you are. She was incorrect, but she didn't scare me because I knew to go ask, and I knew the civil rights office, and I knew who was in charge. But the league, in big time, prepared me to be able to handle Tallahassee and Washington. I'll tell you one more story. I got a phone call from the director of a daycare center in Zellwood, which was way outside of Zellwood and up the dirt road past the they had a big square in the middle of their dirt road where people fought, fighting area. Go on up to the daycare center. She calls, she says, Mrs. Carpenter, I have a big problem out here. Can you come out? And I said, yeah. So I jumped in the car and went out to Zellwood. And when I got there, and this daycare director, Mrs. Willis, was not young, very black, sitting behind her desk, where she always was, and I liked her and knew what she was doing. And there was a young man standing in front of her, very young man, very blonde, very blue-eyed, and very officious. And she introduced us and said, he is here from IRS. And I said, well, now what's the problem? And he said, she has not been paying the withdrawal money for her employees. And she doesn't seem to be able to tell me who is employed here and what their hours of work are. And I said, well, I don't know if I can help you. So I sat down in the corner. And he kept asking her questions, and the more he asked, the dumber she got, until he left. And then I walked over to her. I said, Miss Willis, where are your employee records? And she lifted up her blotter and pulled them out. And she says, there they are. She says, And she showed me who worked there and what hours they worked and what they got paid and the whole thing. And she said, out here, we have to care for the children from the time the mother goes to the grove, and that's when the sun comes up. And she comes back after the sun goes down, and she works 12, 13 hours a day. And you allow me to pay for 8 hours. So I have the money, so I pay for her for the hours that she worked, and I have not been paying IRS. I said, Miss Willis, how much do you owe our IRS? And she's about $20,000. She knew exactly. I said, well, let me see what I can do. So I went back outside. I got in the car and drove to Tallahassee and went to see the committee that made decisions about our contract and how many hours a day we could pay for a child in daycare. And it was 8 hours. Well, and that's what we were paying, is 8 hours. If our child was there for that day, we paid her for 8 hours, but the mother was there for 12. And that's what, I knew that. And so I explained this to the 5 white men sitting on the committee. And they were listening. And they said, really? Well, yeah. And they changed the rule. And I could, beginning today, pay her for actual hours that people worked. And we had a record of what hours they worked for every single day and the child's eligibility for that day. We knew all that. And so we did. So then, of course, I drove over to the United Way office and asked if they would give us $20,000. And they did. Yes, the League of Women Voters showed me how to do that.
Right.
Showed me how to get the facts and do it. I had another one, same place. She called me up and she said, I've got several more, but this one called me up and said she had a problem and could I come out there? And I said, yes, I would come out. I've lost my train of thought. I was thinking about the other one now. I'm old.
Join the crowd.
I'll have to tell you the other story. This Miss Booker out in Winter Garden called me and wanted to come out. And I said, well, I'm doing this and this. And she said, well, I'm coming to see you. So she came in, she stood on the porch and talked to me. And she said, her board of directors, and this is another totally black community in the migrant camp west of town, out of Harlem, south of Harlem Heights. And she said, they think that you give me this money at the first of the year, all in one lump, and they want some. And the fact is, we paid them every month at the end of the month after we were determining the eligibility of the children and the hours of the parents and on a daily basis and the whole thing. She knew that, and I knew that. And I said, well, just tell them how the system works. And she said, you want me to get hit in the head in the night with a rock? So, no. So I went out and met with her board of directors, and the chairman of the board was a not very tall man, and he was the blackest man I've ever met, and not handsome, but very articulate. And he said, Mrs. Carpenter, he welcomed me. He said, you sit there, and then the next row, nobody will sit there. And then the next row will be where the board members sit. And then the next row behind that, that's where everybody else can sit. And then he got up and welcomed the people very properly and very articulately and suggested that before the board meeting that I had come at their request to resolve a problem that they were having internally. And he expounded on what the problem was and asked me really to get up and confirm what he was telling, that they sold days of service for this and reason, and that we paid them at the end of the month, and that that's the way its system worked. And nobody said anything, but they twisted in their chairs. They were not happy. But I sat back down and he convened the meeting, chaired the meeting properly, let the board members speak, adjourned the meeting, and walked me to my car.
Ah.
Carefully.
So yeah, the League of Women Voters set me up for this,
Oh, if we
both
only-
intellectually and properly, because that's where I learned all of these things, and because of the caring that the League has for people, and at that time it was political, but what I fell into with our Committee on Children was what was really happening and what can be done by 5 women in white gloves.
Right. Right.
So it's true, and that has been my experience.
What was it like in that time for women and for people of color compared to today? Or just what was the experience?
Just like you think it was. Just like you think it was.
But you forget, I just watched Battle of the Sexes, which was based on the 70s, and you forget.
Yeah, you do. I lived through that too. I told you on the phone, I always went to the county commission meetings, and this was way back now in the early 50s. And I learned, and I taught my staff later when they were going to county commission meetings in our behalf from 4C. But you go and you be there on time when they turn the lights on, and you stay to the end of the meeting. You don't leave when they dismiss the public part, the public spoken part. You stay to the end of the meeting until they turn the lights off. And some of my staff thought that was ridiculous. I said, no, you stay to the end of the meeting, because they can at any time, and they will, and I've seen them do it, they can reconsider a vote that was taken earlier and change it. Until the meeting's adjourned, they can change a vote, and they do. Oh, well, one night I was there, and it was downtown, the old courthouse, and it was very dark, and it was raining hard, and the meeting went on and on, but I'm always sitting on the front row, and they knew who I was, and every now and then they'd think about doing something, and one of them would look, oh no, we'll do that. It's just like you said. But I waited till the meeting was adjourned, and we all walked down. I was the only woman there, and we walked out to the parking lot, and I got in my car. Nobody walked me to my car. I got in my car. It was pouring down rain, and I looked up, and I saw the men all hovering around this one car that wouldn't start. So I got out and walked over there in the rain. And it was that somebody's car had a dead battery, and nobody had a jumper cable, but I did. So I remember that night really well. I had a jumper cable, and they jumped him off, and he got gone. I could tell you stories all day long about what happened with black people and white people in like Miss Willis and the IRS, but also here in town. And about men and women and pay grades, that was very real, and authority. Now, somehow I managed to keep my job and stand up to it, but a lot of women did not, and that was hard. It was just like you read about and hear about, in every way.
You're all good? Got more?
I feel like I should have more.
I don't know. I think that was pretty rich.
I think that's enough.
That is very rich.
Oh,
Yes.
that's amazing, Phoebe.
I had to study about that
Come on.
after you asked me.
Okay, we're recording.
After you asked me, I had to study about when did I join the League. It was 1948 or 49 early. And I was active for just 2 or 3 years, and then married, moved away for 2 years and came back. But in those early years, the League had units that met in different places, and there were maybe 12 units. And each one served a geographic area. Ours was at Ivy's Drugstore, which was on Gore Street. You don't remember Ivy's Drugstore. was on Gore Street and was demolished when Orange Avenue was put across Lake Lucerne, because that's where it was, where Orange is now, on backing up to Lake Lucerne and facing Kuhl Avenue. We met on the second floor of Ivy's once a month. And there, in all of the different units, is where it was decided what issues we would study and what we would do about them. And all of that information was gathered and taken back to the board of the league, who came back with specific actions that we were going to do, which involved going to see county commissions and city councils and specific activities. And I miss that. It was wonderful. We were close friends because there were 15 or 20 of us at most in a unit. And we acted together, and then somebody else said, hey, that's good, and the other unit's doing this, and we're doing that, and then we did. At that time, our league was called the Winter Park Orlando League of Women Voters. Before that, it was the Winter Park League of Women Voters, formed by two sisters whose name I'm not remembering in Winter Park, but they were great, and they led us and badgered us and told us the way. They were wonderful. There were several cities, I was going to say involved, but that's not so, several cities into which we looked, like Orlando, Kissimmee, Apopka, and then the county governments were very interesting to us all, because county governments were really, I'm not going to say that they were just forming in 1940s or 50s, but they were not like they are now. We went to the county and city commission meetings, and I remember asking my mother what to wear when you went to a commission or a council meeting, and she told me, you know, wear a suit. She didn't say business suit, but she just said dress, something like going to church. And Sarah Howden had told her that 5 women with white gloves could get the county commission to do anything they wanted, which turned out later not to be totally untrue. Later, in 1956, I became the chairman of the League of Women Voters Committee on Children, and Jean Siegfried was a very active member of that children. I was going to say our focus, but our task was to find out what's going on with the Orange County parental home and do something about it. And we did that very slowly. We were active for 4 years, and we learned slowly that children who were at the parental home were both dependent children who had been mistreated by their parents and had been removed, and also delinquent children who had been arrested for one or another crimes, but they were all put in the same room. There were 3 rooms for them, cells, and each of those cells was about the size of this room if it were fully rectangular, and the keys were big. The director of the home there was one building, and the children were in that room all day, and we visited there and saw them, and they ranged in age from just walking to teenagers. They were fed through a slot in the door. They toileted in the corner of their room. It was a terrible thing, and we became very exercised about it and very upset about it. We met together, a lot of times at my house in different places, and we toured the home out there and saw into the cells and saw what was happening. We objected to the county commission of what was happening with children and gathered statistics on what the result would be. Ultimately, because of our agitation, the building was torn down, and the home was replaced with 6 buildings on the same site out at Michigan and Bumby, still there. And that has continued to grow, and the children were separated into children needing parental care and children who were delinquent and convicted of something, and they both had schooling, they still do, and they both had counseling and activities. We did a good thing. During those 3 years, I've never had this any other time or reason, but I got death threats over the telephone. Two specifically, and some others I wondered about. But my husband was very upset and wanted me to quit, which I didn't. But that was really real and very upsetting. After it was all over and the home was being torn down and the children were being relocated, I got a letter from Jim Lind, the chairman of the home, congratulating our committee for the work we had done and thanking us for the time that we had spent. And he enclosed, or he sent in a separate box, the key to the last cell as it was torn down. I don't still have it. I gave it away when I moved here. But I had it framed in a little box on a piece of velvet, and I kept the letter from Jim in the back because it meant so much. And that was in 1960.
Yeah.
And then, we all lived our lives. In 1971, I became the director of 4C, which is Community Coordinated Care for Children. In my mind, that's an outgrowth of our committee's work at the parental home. In fact, it was an outgrowth of the daycare effort at Park Lake Presbyterian Church. And it was also Beth Johnson, who was one of the presidents of our league along the way and one of my mentors. And 4C still lives. It's doubled in size since I left, and I left 20 years ago. But 4C pays for child care for low-income working mothers. When I left, it was serving 5,000 children a year, a day, each day of the year, and was spending $30 million of cities, counties, private funds, United Way money, and state matched it all. Now, I say the League of Women Voters set it up for us to do that. Although the 4C was not a project of the League of Women Voters, a lot of people thought it was. I've heard people make speeches and say that the 4C toy library was a project of the League of Women Voters. Well, it wasn't, but that's all right. Anyway, that was my life at the League from 1950 to 1990. And that was very much a part of my life. Now, let me answer your questions.
Your pause.